SVB is a content creator, a good friend of mine. He was featured on my stream a long time ago, back when he was just some random guy commenting on Reddit. Now he's this big guy, big streamer, really nice guy, good coach, smart player, smart guy, really good content creator. He was featured on Blizzard Battle.net. He was a featured streamer. Really, really nice guy. He does a lot of these great debate situations where he hosts people and gets them to talk about different topics. DPA head coach of Gladiators, has been for the last couple of years. Hayes was a co-head coach, I believe, for the Philadelphia Fusion. He was the coach for the London team in the World Cup a year and a half, or basically 2 years ago, almost 2 years ago. And he's been coaching kind of off and on through EU. I know he's doing a lot of consultant coaching. He does a lot of paid coaching. He's been doing a lot of content recently. You guys have probably seen him in my Discord and my stream recently. Kasoris, head coach for Team Netherlands, last World Cup, has been the head coach for Young and Beautiful, kind of off and on. And then also is now obviously not the head coach, but the assistant coach for the San Francisco Shock, who got picked up recently. So basically, yeah, this was kind of selfish. This is not, hey, everyone's gonna love this. This is like, I wanted to watch it, but I figured, hey, if I'm gonna watch it, I'm gonna make you guys watch it too. So we're gonna kind of look at this because I'm interested in it, and I figured if some of you guys are interested in this as well, there you go. Move chat to center bottom. Okay, I will do that. That's actually a good point. This is why I have my keepers. Why is that going to be disruptive? What do you guys think? Does that fit? Nice of you to share. Yeah, see, I'm always considerate. Is that better? Is that okay? Hey, all right. Would you do this for any SV's other content? Some of it, but the problem is he has some of his content is like very much opinion related, like what Overwatch needs and balance and stuff like that. And I do have opinions on that, but I don't think my opinions are like great because I haven't thought about them enough. So I don't really, it's like if I haven't done enough research on something, I try and not share my opinion with it publicly because then people like take it as like gospel. Because obviously I'm the most intelligent person in the entire world. So like, if you don't know anything about it, just shut up and be ignorant. It's okay to be ignorant about something that you don't know about. I think it's my life philosophy. Cass is a feeder in your ranked games. Rude. Thank you for EU from the stream. Yeah, I prefer streaming earlier, honestly. So okay, let's roll.
All right, guys. So we're gonna get right into it. There's a lot to discuss. We're gonna split this into two halves roughly. I'm gonna try and keep the focus in the first half on coaching itself and your guys' experiences and your thoughts on coaching itself. And then in the second half, I'd love for us to discuss Overwatch more generally, particularly as an esports.
Is this too fast for you guys?
Best minds when it comes to Overwatch in that scene. So there's a lot to discuss there as well. But for starters, we're gonna kind of start very, very straightforward, very, very basic for anyone who isn't super familiar with the highest level of Overwatch. I'm gonna ask you guys, what does an Overwatch coach actually do, especially when we compare it to a physical sport coach? Because a lot of people would understand what a football or soccer or
because I can do 1.25 if it's a little too fast. Just let me know.
I do, but what does an Overwatch coach do? Hayes, I'm gonna throw this up to you first.
What does an Overwatch coach do that a physical coach doesn't do? Obviously, similar to a physical coach, you have to understand how you want to train your players. So, for example, in Overwatch,
Last interruption before we get going in. I'm gonna try and okay. So first off, disclaimer: I've been coaching for years, not just Overwatch. I know a lot about coaching. I learn a lot about leadership, and I've learned a lot because maybe unlike some of these coaches here, these guys are really good coaches. But everybody deals with struggles. But I've had some really, really rough situations that I've gone through with Uprising Academy, with the starters You're Cold, with Chicken Contendies, with Phase 2 being unsigned, with Sydney Droppers. So I've been into a lot of really bad situations. So in a way, because I've not had a really smooth climb to the top, I've learned a lot. I learned a lot from my errors, which I made a lot of. So I feel like in a lot of these guys, a lot of these situations, I do have a lot to provide in terms of opinions because I've had to solve so many different situations and so many problems, and I've coached in just about every scenario. So obviously not Overwatch League level coach. I'm sure these guys are great. I'm not going to be insulting or rude, but I'm going to say if I disagree with them. So again, don't take my word necessarily as gospel. I should take what they say, listen to my response, and then you draw your own conclusions. So don't, just because I say it doesn't mean it's fact.
Practice usually 2 to 4 hours a day. We scrim against other teams.
Wait, can you actually set custom speed? Oh, you can custom speed? Chat, let's go. 1.4. I didn't know this.
So part of a coach's responsibility for that is to set the practice routine, set the schedule, set some structure for the players to follow. I think that's one big thing that players need is some structure. Obviously, we're practicing 2 to 4 hours a day. Coaching requires like setting strategies, adjusting strategies, working one-on-one with players. Honestly, most things that a physical coach would do in other sports also carries on over into Overwatch. You're working a lot with the players. You're basically helping them improve. But there are many teams that have different coaches and different kind of roles. Depends if you're a strategic coach, if you're a one-on-one coach, if you're a head coach. There are a lot of different kind of roles inside of Overwatch, which also is the same in physical sports, like football, you name it.
Yeah, I mean, Kasor, I feel like you'd be great to chime in there because you have transitioned recently from analyst to assistant coach. So what was your job as analyst, and like what is your new remit, if you're at liberty to discuss?
Yeah, so my job as analyst was mostly like helping the coaches with statistics, with scouting documents, with very strategic, like, oh, on this map we're going to set up here, oh, this opponent's going to do that. So it's a lot of text, statistics, and presenting that to other coaches. While I feel like the difference between an analyst and a coach is I feel like the analyst is focused all about presenting it to the other coaches and giving them stuff to work with, and a coach is to truly, take that to the players as well and work with the whole team to present that. So
yes, being an that's an important distinction. Analyst, you don't work with players as much. You're more of like a tool. Coaches, you're working more with the players directly. Even if you're just an assistant coach, you are working with the players more.
Analyst was great when I was not on site, right? Because I could work on this document, work on these stats, and give that to Krusty, the head coach, and the other coaches. And now that I am officially like upped to coach, I'm going to move there and physically work with the players. And obviously still, I'm going to work more on the strategic side. So still help with the scouting documents, still help with these setups, but also work with the players more directly and do individual sessions too, right? And then I've also worked for the Reign, and that was more as a one-on-one coach, where I did sessions with the players like every week or every 2 weeks, depending on the player. So I've had a lot of different roles so far, and it all flows into each other a little bit, because I feel like the ultimate role of a coach is to support your players as best as you can and to make them as best as you can. But, having set roles and having them defined is very good.
Yeah, absolutely. And Deepe, I mean, you've kind of been in charge of the Gladiators for a while. What kind of structure do you prefer? Do you prefer to have like these very specified roles, like, okay, you're the analyst, or do you prefer a more ad hoc kind of style?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question, because I think Hayes hit on like a lot of good points that like we have to set the structure, right? And Kasoris went over the different roles you might have within this structure of especially coaching structure, and it's stuff that I've had to like look into and like think about for a long time. A big difference between us and maybe physical sports, traditional sports, is like they have a structure very clearly planned out, and it's been organically done throughout the ages. Like I'm guessing football/soccer or whatever, like choose any sport, it was probably really scuffed at the beginning, and then so along the way you like got like, especially as of recently too, right? Like within the past 20-30 years, people have had like analytic departments. People like actually know what value they're getting out of a player. They're not like I like this guy type of thing. So we're within that like really nascent stage of Overwatch, and so right now I'm more on the ad hoc train, because I feel like if you commit to something and then you're wrong, that's worse than being able to free flow about and kind of naturally move around people's talents. So for coaching structure, I kind of keep it more loose, but I do have like a very general structure of like, hey, something I think is really important is communication. So as coaches, we're always going to meet 1 hour before we have any team discussion. We're going to meet 1 hour before, and we're going to, if we need that 1 hour, like we'll use that full hour to discuss whatever we need to discuss. Like if we're going over clips for today, whatever, like we're going to use that hour. If we're just sticking around too, like that's fine too, because we get to learn more about the game. Much like an analyst would talk to a coach about, hey, here's this thing. Like maybe we can just shoot the shit about, hey, I think the D.Va changes are going to be really good and she'll be better than Sigma type of thing. Like we can just like talk about the random stuff in the game that's on our mind. So there are like certain things that I've built around that like I want like the structure to be like. I really want heavy communication between coaches, but I also want heavy autonomy at it. I don't want you to tell me like every little thing that like happened between you and a player, but I do want you to tell me, hey, I want to talk to a player about his confidence or whatever, and like tell me that at some point, and then like we can talk about if you're having problems with that, or like, oh, that's really good information for me to know, so that way I know, hey, I need to give this player more confidence type of thing. So I think it's pretty similar, but not similar in the fact that we don't have this like very rigid structure that other organizations have that they've built over time.
Yeah, actually, that brings up a good point that we'll definitely come back to later. It'll be a larger topic of discussion, which was one thing that already strikes out to me as different to physical sports, is that there is something out of your control in the sense of the game's balance itself. And as you mentioned, those D.Va changes, of course, could radically change your life, the lives of your players, if Blizzard change X thing, which is obviously there's nothing like that in physical sports. Like nobody, I mean, there are minor rule changes every now and then in major sports, but nobody comes in and it's like, oh, you can't kick the ball anymore in soccer. Like, sorry, we've decided now you got to do it this way. So that's one thing I definitely want to touch back on later. But I kind of want to ask a more general question first. Is that do you like the idea of being like these kind of pioneers in figuring out what is going to be the structure for esports, or is it scary? Are you looking to other esports for like kind of?
So like we'll kind of pause there. I think a lot of what was said about how Overwatch esports has kind of organically kind of figured its way out and is still figuring its way out in terms of like structure of the coaching staff. I think that's a fair assessment. That's something that I personally have worked and tried and struggled with. I've generally had something of a coaching staff. I think Uprising Academy was the only time. Well, Sydney Droppers as well, where I generally would have more than just one other assistant coach. I'd have a couple other people filling different roles and kind of making sure that everybody's on the same page, everybody's working together, everybody knows their role, is something that I put a lot of priority on. And it's a constant struggle, because a lot of times what the team needs changes, and sometimes it's like, hey, you're a strategic coach, but we just don't really need that right now. So like, I'm gonna get you busy on this and that. So like that kind of can be an issue, but it's obviously very important that there's an open line of communication with your coaches, that there's set expectations, that you're not just like letting your coaches just kind of do their thing and then just not really aware, or, you know, because maybe sometimes your coaches, your assistant coaches are like, hey, I don't really like what we're doing with this. You know, maybe they feel like they want an open line of communication with you because they think that they could be better used elsewhere. Or, you know, you also need to be keeping in touch with how they're doing when they're working with this player, or maybe this player said this, and you need to be aware of that. And I know that that's something I've always tried to prioritize, is like kind of keeping in contact with my coaches so that there's a constant line of communication. Like Deepa was saying, like the meetings beforehand. And I think that's something that's really, really important. Really, really important from a coaching staff standpoint. But obviously that gets better. That gets better with time. Hey, thanks to the host. Hey guys. Speaking of, you know, handsome gentleman, there he is. So obviously that's something we want to talk about. But okay.
Help and advice, or you just like...
We'll pause really quick. Just so the Hayes viewers in chat, we are looking at the great coaching debate hosted by SVB, Azark Thanks for the Fall, featuring Hayes. And we're going to kind of play at 1.4 speed. I'm going to let them talk, chime in with my own opinions. I've been team coaching for a long time. Kind of worked my way up from like literally like Masters Diamond team coaching. So I've kind of had the experience of not necessarily working at the OWL level, but working everywhere but the OWL level, and trialing at the OWL level as well. So yeah, we're going to try and give my input on that. Like I said, I also have a lot of experience coaching and teaching outside of Overwatch. That's all I've done for jobs, basically.
Now we'll figure it out ourselves. And that's open to
Some of your takes are garbo. Oh, for sure. But I mean, we haven't got to them yet, though. I'm excited, though.
I imagine it must be terrifying. Like, it is terrifying. I've been there before. It's terrifying. Yeah, I mean, that's all there is to say. Is terrifying, because you've got to figure it out on the fly. And to be honest, I think most coaches that come into Overwatch, they haven't had experience coaching before. I don't know about Deepa and Kasores, but I've never been a coach before. I kind of learned with Overwatch. Overwatch was where I kind of began.
You guys, that scares the crap out of me. Imagine not getting into Overwatch coaching and not having worked in a teaching before. Like, that actually scares me. I don't know how you guys did that. You know what's actually funny, though, is I got into coaching Overwatch, like coaching professionally for a long time, but finding out how to translate that into coaching Overwatch actually was my biggest struggle. And it's actually a lot of my early errors as a coach were because I was treating Overwatch like it was a normal sport. And that was really awkward. I'm very grateful for a lot of my communicational background and my teaching background, but in terms of like actual leadership in esports, that was really hard. That and it's sometimes like I said, I would force things that didn't work. So in a way, mostly it was a blessing, but there were some hiccups as well.
My journey, I fell into coaching through. I was originally a videographer, so I was recording videos for teams, and that's kind of how I joined Reunited back in Apex Season 1 or something. I joined them originally as a videographer, and seconded as a coach, and I kind of learned from there. But I think a lot of the coaches in traditional sports, they've had years and years of experience, and a lot of us. I'm speaking for myself. I don't have years and years. I've been coaching since Overwatch began. That's 4 years. We're talking about traditional sports. These guys have been coaching for what, 20, 30 years. So yeah, we're definitely behind we're at the forefront, really. It's exciting and scary at the same time, I would say.
Yeah, just to piggyback off what Hayes was saying, I totally agree that it's terrifying, but it's really rewarding when you get things right. But it feels so rare because, like, with structure too, you can never really know if this thing was positive, right? It's this more abstract thing, and it's at the end of the day, you're only measured by as a coach, you're only measured by do you win or do you lose. Like, it's like a really sad thing of sports, but it's true. Like, your players' feelings towards you is also going to be based on if you're winning or if you're losing a lot of the times, and that's fine because that's
mostly he's right. Mostly, I will chime in and say. I mean, as a professional coach, yes, I think the wins and losses clearly like 95% of what you do. But especially for you guys out there in chat that are probably like, you're not paid to win necessarily. Maybe you're coaching a diamond team, maybe you're coaching at the collegiate level and you're like focused on developmental. Like, your impact on a player should be way more than just, hey, we won more games. Like, you could do both. You should do both. It's not really a compromise necessarily, but like, you should walk away from working with a team, or finish the season or whatever, and like, you've helped them to mature. You've helped build good habits for them. They've learned how to communicate better. Like, You've given them good, like been a good example. Like that should be the goal. Like that should be the goal. It's tricky at the Overwatch League level because it's your job to win. But even then, I think when I walked away from my Uprising Academy, my job was to win as many games as we could, or to develop talent. I won't get my gripe over that too much, but I felt like I developed talent to an extent, but I did feel like when I walked away, there wasn't any player that felt like I did a bad job. I felt like I had something of a positive impact with every player I coached with at Uprising Academy, even though that their seasons down there, like their whole philosophy just didn't work, right? I still feel like I had an impact. And that's how I feel good about things. Like I'm still close with every single player, or relatively close with every single player I coached. And I felt like I said, a positive impact. And I still talk with every player I've coached. And to me, that's really important. Zero care, thank you for the fall. So something to keep in mind, especially for those in chat that aren't Overwatch League coaches.
It's kind of how it should be, but Hayes brought up a really good point, which was like I started my career just the same, like just with Overwatch. I have some background in coaching. I did some like tutoring and stuff like that, but nothing truly like coaching, to be honest. And it's just not the same. And these other coaches, like I think someone was talking about a young head coach in the league for basketball, and they were like 50 or something. And I'm like, that is not young. they started in like the film room, like they were probably a pro college, like whether they were D1 to D3 player or something like that. They were a college player, maybe had some small pro career. This is like very typical of coaches. Went into the film room from like age 25 to 30, 25 to 35 or something like that. Was an AC for a really like not even an AC, like below an AC for like 10 years, an AC for 5 years, and then they were on that's a fast track. Like I'm describing a really fast track, whereas like 5 years in the video room is like something we don't have the luxury of doing, right? And esports is so new. Like you bring a StarCraft coach over, it doesn't necessarily work out. But yeah, I think it's really interesting, but it's also really terrifying. So coaching is not for the weak, So.
Do you see it kind of evolving in that direction? Do you see us having 40-year-old coaches, 50-year-old coaches who've had like years and years of esports experience, or do you think that esports is kind of a young man's game?
See, I'm not entirely sure. I think it will develop more, and there will be grander coaching staffs in the future as there's more money put into like esports as a whole. Because a big reason, why some teams have more coaches, some people have less coaches, it's just because of budget. But I don't know if it like in 20 years there'll be 50 coaches on a team. But with a greater structure, you can divide the roles better. You can build a greater coaching staff. Maybe there will be like 10 coaches on a team instead of like 3 on some teams now, or even 2.
Yeah. I think just going along with that, stability is super important. Like money is like a factor of stability, like how much people believe that esports will exist for a long time. And esports is really general. It's like esports is just encompassing any sport played on an electronic device, right? Like, so it's not even just like, oh, we invested into basketball for like 50 years. We're talking about investing into a whole ecosystem. So it's really hard to say if we're going to have that level of stability, going forward. But I think that's all our hopes as esports coaches that it does. But we'll have to like see just as time goes along.
I think one thing we can do, like since we are at the beginning, I think there's a lot of things we can take from traditional sports, like in terms of coaching. We can learn a lot from traditional sports, which is a good thing for us in a way. We can kind of see what people have done and see what works, and kind of test those things out and try with those, and then obviously see if it's working. But I think we can take a lot from traditional sports, in terms of like learning personally for coaching and kind of direction.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, to kind of vibe off Deepay's point there, again, it's just the transition is so difficult because you're not going to ask somebody to go from being a basketball coach to being a soccer coach, right? Whereas in esports, like you said, going from being a StarCraft coach to being an Overwatch coach might have zero transferable skills other than just the coaching itself. So because games, I suppose, don't have stability, other than like a few notable titles like Counter-Strike and StarCraft, which have been going on for so long, but because games don't have, we don't know if this game will even be popular in 10 years from now. Yeah. It's hard to keep that stability.
I don't know if we'll see like 40 or 50-year-old head coaches or coaches in esports, because I feel like you have to have an understanding of the game, and unless the game has been out like 20 or 30 years, and I mean, you can definitely see older people playing Overwatch, but I haven't yet seen any people that are serious about playing Overwatch at that age who wants to then become a coach or something. Maybe down the line where it's more acceptable, that could be a thing, but until then, I don't see. I mean, Overwatch is probably not going to last like, I don't know how long it's going to last, but I'm assuming I don't think I'll be playing Overwatch when I'm like 50. That's just a guess.
Overwatch 20.
You're going to be playing Overwatch 4 by then.
Okay, yeah, I was being generous with you.
4 Overwatch is in 25 years.
Overwatch it's 2070. Overwatch 3 was announced 15 years ago. Blizzard is still teasing.
We'll be doing the 15th Uprising event.
But is part of that, though, is part of what you alluded to, Hayes, is part of that down to just esports being unstable as a career right now? Like, when you're young, you can afford to, throw yourself into an unstable career, take a shot at becoming pro or a pro coach. But when you're 30, can you really afford to take a shot at an unstable frontier?
I don't have I have a family, but I don't have a wife and kids right now, so I don't have to provide for anyone. So I have the luxury of being able to be financially free. You're exactly right. Like when you're older, you're going to have those responsibilities you have to look after, and unless you're tied down. And like, right now, I think depending what role you're in, coaching for sure is not a secure job. We know that from watching. I mean, look at the Premier League. The coaches are getting shuffled around every month or so, and that's going to be the same in Overwatch League and every other sport, I think. So it's definitely uncertain. Yeah, I would say esports is 100% uncertain kind of territory with financial stability.
Yeah, just the nature of competition, right? You're gonna get fired as soon as someone feels like you don't perform, and like it's probably reasonable in the sense that like we need to like get better talent, but like it's not a stable job if you have a wife and kids, like you were saying. You got a family to provide for, extra responsibility basically.
But yeah, I mean, Kasores, how do you feel about that actually? Before I vibe off some more.
I think I'm not sure if I agree with Hayes' point that we won't see any 40 or 50-year-old coaches in the future. I think we could see as esports become more stable and contracts become a little bit longer and iterations in games like we were on. Now CS:GO is still viable. That's been viable for like a really long time in esports. So I could see like the average age of a coach go up for sure. But right now, and I feel like this is with any competitive like normal sports or esports, I think, if you fuck up for 1 or 2 seasons, people look at results, so you can just be cut. And it's hard to fall back on something, especially in Overwatch now, where it's like Overwatch League, you have like a salary. Under that, you have nothing,
Yeah, no, I tend to agree because, yeah, I mean, who really knows what's going to happen with esports? It may be the case that games do become so long-lasting like CSGO or like StarCraft in many ways has and could have been, that you would be able to have long-term coaches that can continue to transition. And again, perhaps if coaching itself becomes a more stable career in an esports sense, you would be able to make the jump from one game to another, because I don't think there's inherently a barrier between learning a new game, right? Even if you're older, like I think if you're in your 30s, I don't think inherently you would be incapable of picking up at least the knowledge of what it takes to be good at a new game, even if you may not be as proficient as you could be at it yourself, unless you guys disagree.
I think it depends on the role within a team, because for a head coach, I actually feel like game knowledge is on a lower priority than like leadership and communication skills. But for an assistant coach, I 100% feel like the game knowledge is really hard to learn in a short period of time. So if you have a longer period of time, which you don't have right now, if you would swap games, it would be really hard. But I feel like head coaches especially can lean on their assistant coaches a little bit more for game knowledge. And maybe if they have like really strong leadership, they could swap to another game.
I agree with that a lot.
I think I disagree.
Interesting. And thus it's a debate.
I think I disagree with that because I don't know to what lesser degree you mean. I guess like I should clarify that, but like I've heard this sentiment that like head coaches can kind of be like, people talk about this on various different sports, like this guy's like a good player manager and stuff like that. And I think that's true. That you don't need as much game knowledge, right? Like I can agree with that, but like you can't be a complete dud on it. Like
yeah,
I don't think you would have to be a competent assistant coach in your own right. And especially like maybe I'm just thinking about optimality. Like I'd want my head coach to be just as smart as any of my assistant coaches. Like if we're looking to be like top tier or something like that, like I think that would be like an aim that I would want my assistant coach to have those skills. Because I don't know which one's harder to teach. Like if I was an org picking up a coach, which one's harder to teach? Teaching someone interpersonal skills and like the relationship building part of coaching, or the game knowledge part. And like if I grab someone from StarCraft, could I teach them over?
So I'm going to pause real quick. I don't know how much longer that we're going to be talking about like the age of coaches and esports and all this kind of stuff. I'll chime in. We got a couple older coaches, in chat. So obviously good to hear their takes as well. Metal and Speakeasy. I think the thing is like, it's not that the older coaches can't learn the game. It's the fact that as it is in esports right now, with the longevity of some esports scenes, is that you're going to be continually having to relearn something and reapply for jobs and maybe even switch games entirely. And like, as you get to a point to where you have to provide for a family and things like that just becomes less attractive and less attractive. I think Speakeasy is involved in the collegiate scene, which looks very stable, which is great. But like, really, it's Overwatch League or nothing, or collegiate. Overwatch League and maybe collegiate. And that's pretty much all that pays. Like, there's no tier 2 teams outside of academies, and academies pay just like, if you're 45 years old, you don't want to be making minimum wage, basically. And that's what a lot of these coaches are kind of looking at right now. And it's either that, like with Sheer Cold, I didn't get paid hardly anything. It was basically winnings, which is why eventually I had to say, this is nothing. And at a certain point, you can't do that anymore. Like, that's just not viable. It's just not a viable career path. That and the fact that there's the instability of the scene, there's the instability of, hey, I might have to swap games entirely and like have to learn something entirely new. Right. So it becomes really, really difficult for that kind of a situation. And that's why I think until we see more stability and certainly more payment in the coaching scene, you're not going to see older coaches. And so the coaching quality will continue to diminish. It might not diminish, but it will not improve because having coaches that are older means the scene's more stable, which means you have more experienced coaches, which is good for coaching, right? But if the scene continues to pay little, not be very stable, game is constantly changing, you know, maybe like then you're not, the coaching level will kind of just stagnate, right? Like, because like, look at me, like I maybe I get an Overwatch League job. Oh, great, do that for a couple of years. And then like after a while, I'm gonna be like, okay, you know, I'm still making $45,000 a year. I'm, you know, 29, 30 years old. You know, at some point you're like, okay, enough. Like, when am I gonna actually get paid more? Like it's not, doesn't follow a normal career progression that you do in even other sports, not to mention other career paths. So, you know, follow your passion, but at the moment, esports coaching, at least from what I know of Overwatch, is not exactly a promising long-term thing unless you're involved heavily in like the collegiate that we see Speakeasy and Meadowland, because that does have connections and you're actually involved with the organization, not in specifically esports. Let me actually plug up my laptop. Give me a sec. And then in regards into the head coaching game knowledge, I think head coaches should have a very, very strong macro game knowledge. Hang on, what is this not plugged in for? Oh, yeah, no, I'm good. Give me a second, chat. I think head coaches should have like a very, very strong macro game knowledge, but like all the nitty gritty details don't have to be there. Like you need to know have a strong understanding of the game to be able to make proper decisions about where your team and what your team needs to do, and where your team needs to go and what your team needs to do. But it's not it's not absolutely crucial. But I do agree that you need, at least on the macro level, like big picture, you need to know. Okay.
Overwatch, or if I grabbed an Overwatch, you know, assistant coach who's like not as good on the relationship building, could I build that? And I think from the scene we've seen that more people excel from the other way around, right? Like the strategic minds can learn those things. It's not as good, but like they have more traction rather than the other way around. But I'm not super sure, but I do think that like I just want to emphasize the point that I think you can't have like low strategic prowess or low game understanding as a coach. Yeah.
No, for sure. I do think that personally, I think that interpersonal skills and communication skills and leadership skills are a little bit harder to learn than the game itself, maybe, especially basics of a game. Maybe Overwatch is unique in that, as it's a super, super fast game with so many different abilities. Maybe a slower game such as Valorant would be easier in that, but at the same time, you know, that has a lot of intricacies as well, of course. But I do think that, you know, swapping games is really hard. But I do think that if you have really good like leadership skills, those would carry over way more than maybe strategic skills from another game.
I think the important thing is you need to have that one person who has the vision and can be the leader for the team. That is the most important thing personally, I think, when it comes to a head coach. Like you definitely, like you said, Deepe, you need to have a base knowledge and understanding of the game. But I think most coaches nowadays in Overwatch have that. And I think the leadership thing is the one that stands out. Someone that has that leadership quality, but also has a good understanding.
Yeah, I agree. I think that is like you very clearly need like one person with that, and I think that's like the most important thing for sure.
Yeah, and I guess a lot of it comes down to the idea of like respect as well, right? Because I think one of the most important things is earning your players' respect and their trust. Is that like something you guys have ever found like struggles with? You know, obviously it will struggle with form, like the performance of your team. But did you have to find that like your own credentials were, you know, needed to be proved, or you felt like you had to show them, well, I know what I'm talking about? You know, again, unlike a traditional sport, you might have a long history of like, well, I've managed 10 teams. But you said this was kind of your first coaching jobs in many ways. So did you have to prove like, I know, because, you know, Hayes, you know, you've been top 100 and stuff like that.
I have a funny story,
like,
actually.
Yeah, go ahead. Absolutely. Share it.
So when I joined Reunited back in Apex Season 1, they basically knew me because I was coaching other teams. And so I joined, they flew me out to Korea. I joined as a videographer, and I started coaching them. And I had a few issues there because obviously they had no idea who this guy is. He's just flown in. He's a videographer, and now he's like coaching the team. So obviously they're not going to be happy about that. So I had to slowly work my way and earn the trust of the players. And eventually, you know, I'm grinding Overwatch, and I'm higher ranked than a few of the players. So I'm like, listen here, buddy, I'm higher ranked than you. You're gonna listen to me. But after Reunited, kind of, you know, like once you've had a decent gig, you have that base level of respect to begin with, and then obviously you prove yourself, and then the respect is there. I think that's the important thing as a coach. You have to prove yourself. Obviously, if you come in, you do nothing, you're not going to get any respect. So you have to earn it.
Yeah, deep sure. Source, yeah, I feel.
I think coming in sometimes it's hard, like starting out with a team. But I feel like as you go through the motions and as you especially get higher along the ranks, I feel like it's a little bit easier. One thing I personally had a lot of trouble with was like on the Reign we had Korean players, right? And we had a head coach that obviously didn't speak Korean as well, so we had a translator. So it was a lot harder to like communicate ideas and thoughts and individual feedback because I was the individual coach through a translator. I mean, also in Korea, your viewers might not notice, but age is way more important than it is in the Western scene. Like people in Asian countries, especially Korean players, I feel respect age a lot more. So it was harder for me to earn.
I don't think it's just about age. I do agree with Kasoris here, but I also think it's in general in Asia it seems to be easier to find a career in esports. So it is more likely that you're able to run across people that are aged and also coaching and still involved in esports. Whereas in the West, you don't see that as much. So something to kind of keep in mind here. Yeah, so far I think some good points being made here. Obviously earning respect, that's like the first thing that you have to do. You don't like go in and start smashing and bashing and tearing things up. You have to earn player respect. I mean, honestly, even if you have like, it's obviously gotten easier for me with each team I worked with because I had more of a past, but you know, it's still something that you have to earn. Every team you join, you still have to earn player respect, player trust, player respect, player trust. Like coaching should get easier as that player respect and trust is earned, but it's still a process.
Their respect because I was 21 when I joined the Reign, so you know, through translation and also age, that coming in, they were like, "Who's this guy?" You know, 21-year-old kid. He was a pro player before, but he just played contenders. Coaching us was like hard to start out with, but as then you know weeks go on, it gets a little bit easier. And obviously now I've got a track record, so you come in with a lot more confidence. But especially starting out, for sure, for like newer coaches, I think that is something that could surprise them, and I feel like it was like a big inspiration why I'm learning Korean right now as well. I've been learning for like 9-10 months pretty actively, but just a little bit of a language barrier. And I feel like one of the reasons why Shock is so successful.
I'm going to interrupt really quick. If you're new to coaching, I want you to treat coaching at your Diamond or Masters or Platinum team as if you were going to a rec league, random rec team, unpaid, with a bunch of randoms just playing pickup basketball. And then you're trying to make roster decisions with that. How do you think that would go? Because that's legitimately the situation that you're in. That's why in a lot of lower tier teams and stuff, especially when you don't have like full player trust and respect, you should just focus on teaching and leadership and encouraging players to do better. Don't go in there and with an iron fist and try and like, this player sucks, I'm gonna get a new player. Don't. You're literally coaching a rec team, and you're not paid. Nobody's paid. Don't do that. What rank minimum would you say is required to start coaching? Bronze. Like, obviously being a higher rank is easier to start with because you have a little bit more game knowledge. And more importantly, you earn player respect a little bit faster, but it doesn't have a big effect. It just makes, being a lower rank when you start coaching just makes starting coaching a little bit harder. It doesn't make you a better coach or worse coach.
Is because Krusty is bilingual, so he's a very easy time explaining his idea to the Korean coaches or the Korean players and the Western players as well.
That's a really fascinating point. I mean, I just want to get D-Pace thoughts on it before I ask a follow-up question.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing in all these stories for me is like you come in with you have whatever baseline respect that you have just from like players' perception of you, and then after that you really have to earn respect by being correct. I've noticed players don't respect coaches if they're not correct, because they have their own really strong opinion about the game. They're a really great player, right? And they have this clear idea of why they're doing something, or maybe they don't have a clear idea of why they're doing something. But a lot of the times, you know, especially when giving feedback or something, like a player will see if feedback is correct if it's explained well, and if you like, and they try it and then it turns out to be correct, right? Like Overwatch is very clear, like, did I do the thing that I was supposed to do, and then did it lead to a better result? It's like very clear from the player perspective. So you have to be correct a lot of the time. So you doing a good job as a coach is really important, and you articulating your ideas, you communicating your ideas really well. Like Kasoris brought up problems of communication, but like you have to find a way around it, or you have to find a way through it, right? And those are just like, you just have to do a good job as a coach, and you'll like go up and down respect. Like at any given point, I'm pretty sure you'll just go up and down. And this is based on winning and losing too. This is kind of what I was alluding to before, because you've seen 10-year coaches who are tenured in leagues, and they'll lose their respect to players despite being, you know, like this high pedigree coach, because maybe they are just losing, and maybe that coach isn't that bad of a coach, but they're just getting shit on, so it doesn't matter. So, you know, you earn respect, but also respect isn't completely in your control. But if you do a good job and your team is performing well, you'll get respect for sure.
Yeah, that leads me to a quick follow-up, which is like, do you feel the pressure to be good at Overwatch yourself, to keep that level of respect and make sure that people, like, because I know Overwatch players, and they can be very, like, particularly when people get to like top 500, they're very like binary in how they view. They're like, no, so and so is garbage. Like, no, it's just garbage, man. What are you talking about? That's garbage.
Yeah.
Do you feel the need to like be able to keep up as a player to, you know, allay their fears or their perceptions about the meta or heroes, etc.?
It's nice to be able to flex my peak on people.
It's nice. Yeah.
I coach a guy called Fuki. He's a Saudi Arabian player. He's playing for one of the contenders teams right now. And whenever he shit talks to me, I'm listening to Fuki. Who's the higher peak out of me and you? And he said he's quiet.
Just like Hayes is the coach that flames you for
No,
being
no,
like, start 4400.
but I think it helps a little bit. But I'm only joking with that. Like I don't flame my players like that.
No,
but,
no. I just,
I think it's okay. It helps a little bit. I think you gain a slight level of respect, but I don't think it's a massive deal.
I think I used to when I just became a coach. I just
Okay, I'm not gonna go through this because we know what the answer is gonna be. Answer no. Answer, it can help if you're micro, but even then it's not. Like I can comfortably do one-on-ones. And EasyBot in chat here also does one-on-ones. And EasyBot's a good player, but he's nowhere near the peak of the players he's coaching. And when I was spending long hours working with Graythan and Backbone, also myself, along with EasyBot, and with Shade and coaching Alex and, you know, coaching Lethal, like I don't have any, like I'm coaching heroes that I have 2 hours on. You know, you just have to have a good understanding of the game knowledge, and also if you want to do one-on-ones, is you have to know the hero really well. Like I can coach Sigma and Sombra very comfortably, even though I have very little hours on them. So no, you do not should feel the need to be good at Overwatch yourself. Lower tier players might say that, but no, you should have good game knowledge, but you don't have to be good at the hero itself. Okay. Anyway, I don't want to waste time on something that we already know the answer to.
stuff. So
Yeah, sorry.
I want to. No. I absolutely love that you went there. I just want to hold you back a little bit, just for a little bit, because I don't want to miss out on something interesting that I found when Consors was talking. Was that the influence of Korea is I think quite probably unique in the sense of like many other sports, at least the ones that we engage in Europe or in North America, are primarily centered in those countries. Whereas we're kind of in a space where we're in Europe, you're in North America to pay, and the dominant force is Korea, and it kind of has been always in esports. Does it like, how does it just shape your lives and also your game itself, knowing that there's, you know, this country that has like the majority of the best players, that the culture comes from there, and obviously mingling with it yourselves? How does that kind of impact you guys?
I mean, obviously for me, it's impacted me incredibly because I mean, I'm learning Korean right now just so I can communicate with the players and the coaches better. I think that's very important for me. And then 60% of the league right now, or so, don't quote me on that, but he's Korean. The majority is Korean.
And they're the better half, right? Like
Yeah.
to be
And
honest, right?
the
It's
top
not just
game.
that they're the majority;
Yeah.
they're the better half of the majority by like a
Mhm.
large margin. Sorry.
So yeah, there's definitely like a very big culture differences between Westerns players and coaches and Korean players and coaches. And the biggest things I found is that the teams that are mixed teams that can manage that properly are good. And if you can't manage those properly, you're shit. It's been like that for these seasons. So that's why
Agree,
you
yeah.
know teams are going full Western or full Korean because having a mixed team and having those cultures clash is really hard.
Just speaking, you know, as someone who's had to manage that, like it's hard. I think it. I had this really like big crisis. I don't want to call it an existential coaching crisis going into this off season because I think anyone who's worked with me knows that I want to win so badly. Like I really hate losing, and I feel like we've been close, but like not really that close. Like I've been, you know, successful to some extent, but not to the extent that I want. Maybe best from like the Western Hemisphere in terms of head coaching for a Western team, but like still not. I don't really want to pigeonhole myself to like, oh, like I'm best in this whatever niche category. I want to be the best regardless, right? So I had this really big existential crisis for coaching. Is like, you know, the better players are from Korea. Like this is a fact. Like anyone who argues this fact is a fucking idiot. I think. Like on the whole, like you have a full Korean team, you have a full Western team. The Korean team will do better, right? You want to be bilingual, and you noted this as one of Krusty's strengths, right? And I think that's true. It's easier to learn English than it is for Westerner to learn Korean because they're immersed in like he's in the U.S. and then also English is more like people's base of English is like much higher, right? Just because it's a worldwide language, it's like perforated throughout the internet and just like media, right? Movies, whatever. It's like much easier to learn basically. How can I as a coach, like I'm gimping myself by I'm the wrong Asian, like I'm Chinese in ethnicity. I don't even speak Chinese to be clear, but like I'm more American than I am anything else. But like if my goal is to be the best, and then like I feel like I have like I was playing WoW at the time, so I felt like my racial passive was fucking just bonkers bad. Like how can I do this, right? And like I've gone through the process, and I think it's like easier. I think it's possible to do, but I think I'm taking like a much harder path. I have to be a much better coach than someone else, and I have to like work a lot harder. And like I'm thinking about it right now. Like I should definitely be learning Korean, but like I feel like it's gonna be hard. Me living in the U.S. To learn Korean. Like if I worked on Chengdu or something like that, me having a base of Chinese, like I think I could do that reasonably. Like but right now, like I've like tried to learn Mandarin in the U.S. like in college, and it did not stick. Let me tell you, I got a little bit better like but it's like 1.5 years of Chinese in college did not help me that much. Realistically, I learned a lot more when I just went to visit my family and like got to use it like 24/7. And maybe this is like a question of dedication, but I guess like that was like a big point for me. Like, how much does this affect me? Like, I had to go through the process of, hey, do I want to coach next season? Like, if I'm not doing something to be the best, like fuck, like for me, it's like fuck it. Like, I do this because I enjoy what I do. I do this because I want to win, and like that's my goal. Can I do this going into next year? And like that's a big crisis I had to like overcome going into this next year. Is like, do I have the mental strength to do this? I know I'm coming in gimped. Like, how can I like overcome this? Like, and I do think it's possible. Like you said, like people who can manage mixed teams will do the best. And like I think we're gonna have to like learn how to do that, and we're competing against everyone else, and hopefully like I see a path forward that we can definitely like become the best for gladiators this year. But it is like something that's really a looming terror for me, is like, can I be the best in the sport, because I'm not the right race. I don't know the right languages and stuff like that. And that sounds really sad and depressing, but like that's honestly like how I felt during the off season, and still how I feel to a smaller extent now.
Yeah, that's very, very interesting. Hayes, I mean, how did you deal with this yourself? Because you managed Korean players as well.
Most of our Korean players had pretty good English. Like Carpe had good English. We did have translators, or our manager was sort of a translator. We had Hui as well. Hui was the co-head coach at the time in Fusion. Obviously he's Korean, so we did have like me and Hui obviously communicating together. We were both head coaches. It was mostly just through communication between me and Hui, to be honest with you. He was, in terms of coaching, he would work a lot with the Korean players, and I would focus on a lot of the Western players as well. And then we'd sort of come together in terms of the overall macro coaching. But yeah, it was very difficult. Sado and pretty much Sado had very limited English, so I couldn't have a one-on-one session with him at that time. They were having English lessons, but it was limited. So it was mostly Hui who was working with Sado and the Korean players. Carpe was fine; he's bilingual. Yeah, it's definitely difficult when you're working with two languages, and I think Kosora's learning Korean is a huge move, because that's also going to make him more desirable in the future. If he does fully learn Korean, he's going to have that under his belt, and that's a massive, massive thing to have, that you can speak English, you understand Overwatch, you can coach Overwatch, and you can speak Korean. So,
and even moving to other titles, right? We talked about like longevity of coaching. Korea's going to be like, they invest in very few esports, but they're very good at the ones they do, right? Like, yeah. I think just by diversity of games, they have like less diverse games, but they're exceptional at those games. League of Legends, Overwatch, for example, like StarCraft, obviously, yeah. That they've just invested a lot of.
Yeah, I think definitely learning Korean would be helpful. I think unquestionably, it's a huge, huge boost to your resume, I guess, and not just to your resume, but it makes you a more effective coach. It makes you more flexible with what you're doing, because ultimately, like, even as a head coach, like, you want to be able to connect and relate with and have a relationship with all of your players. Like, that should be the goal. You should not be like CEO, bigwig. You know what I'm saying? Like, to earn respect and trust, you have to be personable. You have to be able to communicate and like interact with them directly, especially in Overwatch, which has like, you might have a 9 or 10 man roster at most. So there's really no excuse to not have a relationship with your players. And I think not being able to speak their language is a huge drawback, especially if the majority of good players are Korean. One other thing, I don't know if Hayes is in chat, but I have no idea how Philadelphia did the double head coach thing. I get it with like, Western and then Eastern, but to me, that seems like the most juvenile move by an organization that you could possibly make. That just shows the amateur level that Overwatch League was then. You can also see it with, I think, XL2 when it was iOStux and somebody else coaching at the same time for XL2 Academy. Like, there were 2 head coaches there. And to me, that just shows like the amateur level that Overwatch League was at that point. Like, there's no way that 2 head coaches should function. Like, it's just bonkers. Like, yeah, it's funny to me that was like an actual thing at one point in time. So anyway, yeah, same thing with Seoul. Like, what are people doing? Like, what do you mean 2 head coaches? Like, that's just bonkers. Just absolutely bonkers. I could not function in that
infrastructure into, and they'll be dominant in games, and I totally agree that that's a really strong move. Sorry to interrupt your point, Hayes.
So I'm pretty much finished. It'll be big moves from Kosora's.
Thank you. I mean, it's a lot easier with a tutor, right? So I'm working with Sophie Ann, which I'm pretty sure the players that DPA's work with also work with her. So
I know Sophie. Yeah,
always heard good things about her, but I think she helps me a lot, and I think interacting with media. So I'm watching all the Shock Korean players stream all the time, because they're communicating Korea with the chat with the in-game players, and that helps me so much. And then, as Deepe says, you're not gonna learn if you're just in America and not like talking Korean at all. So I'm trying to like talk as much as I can, but it helps for sure, I feel. And I mean,
yeah. Sorry.
Well,
I think it's
Agape.
oh, you go, you go, you go.
No, Agape, for example. Oh, he's gone.
Hayes is
But,
like, I'm done with this shit.
He's like, David, I can't handle you.
they can't even talk. No, but
No,
Agape,
no.
for example, doesn't know that good English, even though he's had English in school, and we, for example, talked in Korean already, so it's already like bearing its fruits. And as I go, I hope I can travel to Korea, can learn there, because if you're there, you learn a lot faster. But since I'm young and I want to keep working on esports for a while, and I want to be one of the best, right? I feel like it's a big boost for sure.
DK, what was it that you were going to chime in with?
Sorry.
He kind of hit on it. No, it was my bad actually. I was saying it's great that you already have you have like Korean coaches that like it's already useful too, and like I think that's a big thing. That you are like you can converse in this language like in multiple different facets, like not just with the players, right, who may or may not be bilingual, but like you can start transferring this across the board because your coaching staff is completely Korean as well. So yeah, I just think you can immerse yourself like really easily, or not really easily, but like more easily than other coaches can. So I think that's great.
Yeah, and a question I have, I don't know how much interest this will be to anyone else watching, but I'm personally quite fascinated. You noted, Kasores, that the Korean players had a greater respect for age as just a sort of cultural thing. Is there any other sort of interesting cultural tidbits that you picked up that you were like, because obviously the underlying thing of all this is what we're saying is that the culture of Korean esports is in a way stronger, and like you said, Deepak, like when they choose, like this is an esport we're going to play now, they just become rampantly dominant, and we could have gone into a much larger discussion into like why Korean esports is so strong. But I'm just curious as like what that cultural thing is that maybe you notice that like, okay, actually Korean players, I don't know, they watch more VODs of themselves, or they are more adherent to strict schedule, or is it not like that at all? Or they're just kind of as individual as anyone else would be?
Oh, it's a really good question, and I think the biggest thing that I've seen it's in Korean culture. There's either we go hard until we die and we like try hard and all there is win, or there is like the complete opposite, right? If they feel disconnected, then there is the drop in interest, and it's like the complete opposite happens. So obviously, I think it's super important that you manage that. And just a little bit tad bit is food. I think Korean food is very specific, and almost every Korean player I've worked with hates Western food. So there is that for sure. So if you have Korean players, make sure you have a cook that can cook Korean food.
Feed them well.
Mayhem recently got a chef, I think, too, or a cook chef. I think it's a good move for them since they're gonna be, or like they're supposed to be in the U.S., right? As far as I know. So that's like a good move. Bordering loves McDonald's and Popeyes, so me and him can relate. I see this kid eat junk food. He weighs like 10 pounds, and like I just yeah, like he probably just eats so little of it. He eats like one meal a day.
Hayes, how did you sort of? Oh, sorry, go ahead, Deepak, if you want to carry on.
Culturally, like I never felt like too excluded from Korean culture. Obviously, there's like a lot of similarities, but Brenda was telling me this, that she thinks I'm the most Korean non-Korean person she's met. So like to me, like when they just have like, I think Mir described it well. He like, and whenever I talk to Korean players, they describe this as like a duty or like a standard. Like their standard of like working hard is like much higher than what a Western player just like they kind of come from like maybe more like socially like anxious backgrounds or stuff like that, right? Like they come from a background where like they played games and like used it as an escape mechanism. Whereas I feel like in Korea it's much more social. It's like infrastructurally there, right? Like you're a god if you're Faker, you're a god if you're Flash. From these sports, and like it's sports there, right? Like that's the main thing. I've heard that they have like a channel of just running StarCraft, running StarCraft, like the ESPN of running StarCraft. And like
Free Sports, I think, yeah.
Yeah, and like they can do that because it's culturally ingrained. So they're like standard of like of seriousness of like this is not an escape thing. This is my life type of thing. Like everything is just raised there, and I think whenever you spend more time with a game, you're going to be better. You have these questions of burnout because like I agree with what Kasora said. Sometimes you need to pull that back because people go too hard. It's like go hard or die, right? Like I'm on that train. I'd rather go hard and like go over the limit. I'm always about like pushing my limit. So like I'm on the like if we're gonna go hard and then just all be pissed at each other for a day, like I'm more fine with that than like undergoing and like being dispassionate, right? Like the other end of what Pistoris was saying. So I think I like naturally align with Korean values, and like it's not because of my Chinese values or like some Asian values. I don't think maybe it is. But this is just like tenets I believe as well. Like I believe in working hard. I believe in dedicating yourself. I believe in like pushing yourself past your limit if you have to, right? Like obviously you try to find your limit, and so like I've never felt like culturally I've been that's been a big problem for me.
Hey, how about you? Us Brits are pretty laissez-faire.
I think I agree with a lot of what Deepak is saying. Like, I think it's definitely about all the infrastructure. Someone in chat put it pretty well. It's like Korean culture for esports is the same as American traditional sports.
Yeah.
I think that's a good way of putting it. Like, kids grow up, they see these idols, they see Faker, they see these people, and obviously it's so much more accessible. Like kids nowadays in the West, not everybody has a PC. Some people have consoles. Consoles are a lot more casual. In Korea, if you see this guy Faker, you see him on a poster somewhere, you can go down the PC bang 2001. What is that like? It's like
I think that's
a few pounds, a few dollars is like almost nothing to go there and play. They have access to these things. They can go and play. They can practice. Like you said, it's a social thing. They go with their friends. They play. You can order ramen. I've been to a PC bang. It's so cool. I love it. but I think it's definitely more accessible. And I think Deepe said it's not about like Asian values. I think it might be slightly towards Asian values, like a tiny bit. But I've been thinking about this topic a lot recently because it's really fascinating to me to kind of figure out like what the difference is between these Western players and the Korean players. But I think it really is all about infrastructure, and like you said, it's more widely accepted over there to be an esport player. So these guys, they're really setting their sights high, and that's what they're going for.
I think right now in Western countries too, it started to get. When I was in like middle school, it wasn't cool to be a gamer. I played League of Legends. I hid it from everybody. I was ashamed to be good like a League of Legends. But now the kids are like all playing Fortnite, and they're like, "Oh, I'm this rank in Fortnite. I'm so good," and that's like looked up to a little bit more. So maybe we're getting there. But I imagine like Korea had this 20 years ago where it was really cool to be like good at StarCraft. So then you want to be better, and you want to be driven, and you want to be better than your peers. But I feel like we're a little bit behind in that in the Western scene.
Yeah, if you tell someone you're a gamer now, like it's still not like if you're a kid,
It's
yeah,
still
it's
a
great.
bit
But like
awkward,
for
yeah.
our age, like
Yeah.
you probably get some weirder looks, and like I totally resonate with what Kasoris was saying, which was like I hid my rank. You know, I was like really high rank, but like Kez was telling me, our former manager was telling me, he was like, you'd be a god in school, like girls would want to date you and everything. Like I think that's still the standard. Like you're like, hey, I'm masters, wink wink. You know, like in league or something. You're like,
I need to go to
I'm
Korea.
top 500. Yeah, I need to go to.
I don't want to flex, but I
Yeah.
one trick Hammond. If you know what I mean.
Yeah, but I'm sure in Korea too, it's an age thing too. That's like a younger generation thing. But it's not like a cool thing. When you think of gamer, you think of like this, you know, degenerate who's on a degenerate sleeping schedule and stuff like that. Who
Doritos
thinks
and Mountain
11?
Dew.
Yeah, Mountain Dew 12:30 wake up time is too early. You know, like these idiots. But yeah, I definitely think it's infrastructural for sure, cultural, infrastructural, whatever you want to call it.
Do you see us getting? I mean, you know, I was reading all about esports being the most like more profitable than sports and music, was it combined or something this year? And
Yeah.
you know, we streamers are forever getting more popular. Do you see that kind of changing, or are we? My gut instinct is that we're kind of still a generation behind, because I think everything that you alluded to, Deepe, was very true. And I think some of it comes ultimately from parenting, because even though kids might be like, yeah, playing Fortnite is cool, how many parents are going to help indulge you get better at Fortnite or get serious at Fortnite, right? I think that's where the real difference lies, and that's when you really see the change in the circle. Because in Korea, again, from my gathering, I'm only speaking through secondhand knowledge, but from what I gather, it's like considered an honor to represent your country in like an esport, right? It's like a big honor. You're like respected, and it's a goal that people would want someone to strive for. Whereas again here, if you tell your parents like, I want to be like Ninja, they're going to be like, well, firstly, who the fuck is Ninja? Secondly, like, why would you play this PC game when you could go and get a regular job? So I feel like maybe we're a generation behind. I don't know if you guys think we can get there.
There are now esports programs coming in universities. So I mean, this is a relatively new thing, right? Like this is very, very new within like the past few years. So I mean, it's definitely getting somewhere. You might be right though about like the parenting thing. Some parents still don't accept like video games. Like I know my parents, for example, they didn't want me to do this until they started seeing me earning money from it. They were like, no, you're not doing it. Oh wait, oh you're earning money. Okay, it's okay. It's okay. But I get it. It's like someone sitting in their room 8 hours a day playing video games, or it looks like they're playing video games. They could be coaching. They could be doing anything related to esports. I think we're kind of like we're getting somewhere with it. I think we're definitely getting somewhere, but it's going to take a little while, I think.
That's fair.
Yeah,
that actually. Oh, go ahead.
I think even for Korean parents, I mean, like it just depends on how traditional they are, case by case. I'm sure it's like kind of leaning one way or another, but I know for skewed parent, like for any parent, like basically you're saying I want to become like a professional musician, like that's the equivalent, right? Because being an esport player in Korea is like really hard, and being a professional esport player anywhere is really hard. But like you're basically saying I want to do this kind of unstable career that might last 1 to 2 years, and like you're pouring a lot of time, and like your parents just see you like I'm not making money and stuff like that. So it just goes down to like parenting values, and like for Koreans, like you have to put food on the table. Like the middle class there isn't that middle or anything like that. Like I think it just will depend on situation to situation for each of those. But if you want to become an esports player, you're basically telling your parents like I want to become a musician, I want to become like this outlandish dream, and it's hard to say yes. If you're a parent, like it's hard to say yes a lot of the times. I imagine, like I don't know what it's like to parent, but like I could see that being very hard to say like I will support you financially for however long, like or whatever. You have to have like this really great discussion with your parents, which is like really hard to have, I'm sure. But yeah, it's I'm sure even in Korea, it's not like great until you, like Kay said, you start making money. Then people are like, okay, it's fine, you do you.
I mean, you coach 18-year-old gamers. I'm pretty sure you're good on learning how to parent, Deepe. Don't worry. You're basically there. You're basically there.
Yeah, I thought about it. It might transfer over. That's a bothering skills, but yeah.
Any more thoughts? Because I have a slightly related question, but I don't want to. If someone has anything interesting to add, I wouldn't want to cut that out. No. All right. So my other related question is.
Okay, so like good stuff. I think the important thing about the generational gap and like the Korean culture is really important. Western culture clearly is like not up to par in terms of like the encouraging of the video games and stuff like that. I think Western culture is like being compared to Western sport culture being compared to Korean esport culture is a pretty fair comparison in terms of like the age, the push, the drive, the work ethic, that kind of a thing. Here's a question though for you guys in chat. I'm not going to answer this. I'm just something to think about. Is video games and online like culture growing as much as it is, and like that becoming? Is that necessarily a good thing, or what do you guys think?
On that topic,
Next question.
How does it change your interaction as a coach and to some extent a public figure when so much of the viewing audience is digital compared to physical, mainly with an eye on like social media? Because I know that's something that like affects players a lot, where there's this weird dichotomy where you're expected to be active on social media so that you can build a presence and be like close to your fans, but at the same time it's pretty vicious out there compared to fans in a stadium who are probably more supportive than Twitter bots.
Ooh, it's hard because I feel like most players I've worked with are able to deal with social media relatively well, but you know, it's about the closeness. It's about the distance from the fans, because if you're playing a traditional sport, it's hard to reach you, right? But on social media, when you have Instagram, Twitter, and you're supposed to be active on them every day to build your brand on Twitch, you read these comments directly, and like depending on the player, like most of these comments are positive, but the negative comments is what really stick with you. I feel, and this is as a content creator as well. I'm sure you know SVB, but I think it can really hurt players if they get called like shit repeatedly by fans, and if they get their ego and confidence cranked. And I know of players that dealt with this like personally as well, where the closeness to the fans and the having to interact with social media has hurt their confidence and their ego and has made them play worse as a result.
Yeah, actually, Hayes, I want to ask you this one because when Kasora's mentioned that the kind of player that came to mind, I hope you won't mind me asking, but Sado came to mind in the sense of like he was, to put it bluntly, much reviled by a section of Philadelphia fans. How did that affect you as a coach? Because you said that you couldn't really have much one-on-one time because there was this language barrier. So did you just kind of have to watch and, you know, let your co-coach help him? Or?
Yeah, it was mostly Squee who worked with Sado, but from what I know of like knowing Sado's personality, he was a very laid-back guy. And I think a lot of what was said about Sado during the Overwatch League, you know, everyone was saying he had a boosting empire or whatever. Like it's not true. Like none of this is true. Obviously he boosted, but he didn't have a boosting empire. Sado was a very laid-back guy, and from what I saw, it didn't affect him too much. You know, he was a very chill, very happy guy. But I'm sure it did have some sort of impact on him. More so from the Korean fans. I think the Korean fans are very harsh in general. I mean, obviously around boosting, because in Korea it's literally illegal to boost. So I get it, and that's again like a touchy subject, because obviously in the West it's not illegal to boost from the standpoint of the law, but in Korea it's physically illegal. If you boost, you can go to jail, you can get fined. So I understand why the Korean fans are a lot more strict about that. But Sado in general, I think he was okay with the whole situation. When he started playing, people started seeing how good he was, and then it kind of started getting a lot better. But in general, I think he was quite chill about the whole situation. Obviously, he didn't want to get banned for 30 games, and he got banned 30 games. Some other players didn't get banned for as long. I think he might have been the longest ban in Overwatch League, actually.
Yeah,
30 games.
3/4 of the season, yeah.
And then some players got like a 3 or 4 man ban. It's kind of silly, but it's in the past now. But in general, I think he was quite chill about it. But then again, obviously, I wasn't talking with him as much because his English was very limited. So.
Were there any players that kind of you saw social media or just the digital nature of esports having a big impact on them?
I think most players do check social media. I don't know if it's I think it's more of an issue with social media rather than like the players definitely have an aspect of like having to interact, but when they're at that level where they're just focused on pro play, some of them don't care about, you know, streaming and whatnot. Some of them just want to focus purely on improving, practicing, grinding, whatnot, and trying to be the best player they can. I encourage players not to go on social media too much, sites like Reddit, that kind of thing, because I think positive or negative, you shouldn't draw rewards or negatives from Reddit. I think you want to focus on like your own internal kind of like values and what you want to focus on as a player, and work towards that. And when you start looking to Reddit for appreciation or whatnot, that isn't a good pathway to go down as a player.
That is a good tidbit for everybody, whether you're involved in esports or not. Social media is cancer. It is seriously mentally damaging. It causes depression. It is distracting. It is a massive time waster. I think the mental fragility of a lot of the players that we're talking about is because they're playing in a situation where, you know, social media is just like a part of their culture. It's like just part of what they do every day. Take that, guys. Like seriously, like I cannot understate how dangerous social media is. Like do your own research. This is not a social media rant, but like it is mentally dangerous. Be very careful about social media. All forms of social media.
Player, I think. So I kind of encourage my players not to go on Reddit.
At some point,
or social medias, whatnot.
At some point, actually took the phone away from a player every single match day because they would keep looking at Reddit and keep looking at their phone every single time they had a match, and I felt it would affect them. And they told me, you know, I looked at Reddit while our match was going on, which is
wow.
Yeah. And somebody said something bad about him, and it said the affected.
That's really bad, actually.
So I made it a point to take away their phone every single match day from that point on until the match was over.
It's bad. I've gotten to the point where like I've had someone who, you know, they won't say it themselves. that it affected them, but like, you know, you can see it that it affects them in some sort of way. And like it's gotten so bad that I've just started reading Reddit like threads to see what they said about this player, so I could like, you know, be more careful about what I say, like see what his like state of mind is. And that seems really weird that I tell my players not to go on Reddit, but I myself am checking on Reddit because I know my players check Reddit. And that's like, it's this weird
See,
circular
you would be a
logic.
great father, DP. What are you talking about? You'd be a fantastic father.
Yeah, and like it gets weird because then I start reading about like shit, and I'm like, oh god, it's like weird. But yeah, I definitely see it affect players. I think it's just like the generation that we're in too. Just like everyone goes to Twitter for, you know, that instant gratification. Like I think I'm outside that age where I use my phone a ton. To be honest, for like social media, like I'm not that active on Twitter. I'll use it like once every now and then. I don't use it daily, you know. But definitely there are people who, like, you know, when they're bored, they just go on Instagram. When they're bored, they just go on Facebook, Twitter, whatever. And like for the players, like that's a natural reaction for them. So like right after the match, they're just like go on Twitter or whatever. But we try to tell them to not put stocks in it. But I even know for I've heard stories for like NBA players and stuff like that. The younger generation, they're like much more attached to their phones, and their egos are much more like fragile for social media. And that's something they have to like grow out of. It's like a lesson you learn the hard way, which is like, I feel like shit after I look at social media. I'm gonna not look at social media after like 3 years. Or like take it with less stock, you know, go through the mental gymnastics of understanding where your confidence comes from. But as coaches, we can only watch it unfold to a certain extent, or we can ban phones, and I'm down.
How do you see that evolving? Like, do you think that's just going to be a natural part of the game, like, or just, you know, professional gaming in general as the future goes up, or would you want like coaches to have some stricter thing and just be like, no, once you're a player, no social media, that's it?
I'm pretty sure it's just a factor of like how good social media will be in the future, and it's probably high, so probably something we can't change, to be honest. Watch The Social Dilemma. That's the shit for the greater consequences.
I've been meaning to.
It's great. It's terrifying, but it's great. That doc, yeah.
Yeah, Hayes, Kasaurus.
No, I just think it's something where, you know, you hate to see it, but you can't be a dictator. You can't say, oh no, Reddit. You know, you can't like block the site in your team house, even though you wish you could. But there's no stopping it, I feel, because brand is also important for a lot of these players, right? Like team is for 1 or 2 years. A following of 100K can feed you forever. So, you know, the importance of social media is also really important for these players, and a lot of these players are really good with social media. So why not milk that as well, right? And have a lot of fan interaction. It's just that there's also dark sides to it. But I think as a player individually, and coaches can help with this, you have to learn how to deal with that.
I love going to events because you get to meet fans face to face and you get to interact with the fans. Obviously, that is much preferred for me over looking to Reddit and these sites. But yeah, I think it's unfortunate this year we're not going to see any of that because of coronavirus. But that for me was the best time to interact with fans and obviously like meet fans, talk with fans, is events, after events, that kind of thing. I think for players, the thing is, you meet a fan in person, you talk to a fan, you're face to face with a person. The thing is with Twitter and Reddit, these people can just go on there and, you know, behind the PCs, they can just type whatever they want. They don't actually physically see the effect they're having on someone when they're typing out these messages. And that is I mean, that's a general problem with social media rather than like this specific topic. But yeah, I think in general, like going to meet fans in person is a lot better for the players. They can see the appreciation, they can see what effect they're having on people. Social media is bad in quite a few ways, but it is, you're right, Kasori, it's very important to grow your brand and, you know, tweet, stream, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
I'm a big advocate for that.
I mean, you were at Oh, sorry.
No, go ahead. I was just gonna say it's an odd catch-22. You go ahead.
Yeah, it's definitely hard because we're encouraged by our marketing team to be like, yeah, do all that stuff. Hayes, you were at Blizzard Arena, right? And like, I felt like that those were like kind of the golden age of like fan interaction for a bit. I'm sure the homestands were great. When they happened, like the brief, you know, 3 homestands that we had, I was really gonna be excited for the Seoul homestand and the Chinese homestand. I feel like the crowds would have just been nutso. I was gonna be really excited for that, but that's when COVID hit. But yeah, I think those interactions with players, like people are gonna be less mean, like you said. Like no one's gonna say that shit to your face, right? Yeah. And yeah, I felt like maybe it's just because I was LA. I'm sure you guys had a lot of supporters too in Philly, but like the fans who went to the arena, they were supportive. Like, and if they were booing, it was clear.
All right, we're gonna wrap this up just because I don't think this part is gonna and it's also what's the biggest thing holding back Al. I'll skip that one as well. But yeah, social media, careful. You know, use in specific circumstances as motivation, sure. But you know, obviously, it needs to be coming from really a verified source. Like even the motivational posts and stickers, those should be coming from people that actually have opinions worth talking about. I'm going to skip the biggest thing holding back Al. Poor casting holding Al back. I'm not sure. I think the casting is a little bit inconsistent. I think casters in general should do a better job understanding the game. I know I personally, when I watch sports, I enjoy when casters are knowledgeable and they're like, okay, this is a, you know, for example, football, this is a 3rd down and 5, you know, they could run play action here because it's a, you know, a goal line situation. You know, they've historically in the last like 30% of the time in these situations, they have thrown deep, but you know, like that kind of stuff. I love that stuff. Like I'm not a, you know, football mastermind, but I appreciate the more in-depth look. And I think a lot of casters I don't know if they don't put effort in, I don't know if they don't have time, like I don't know what it is, but a lot of casters do have very amateurish takes, which I think could be improved. Like simply just spectating scrims, talking with coaches. I know for one that I would have zero issues with a caster sitting in scrims like once a week, explaining the meta, explaining how the game worked. Like, but yeah, progressing holding Owl back. I doubt it's holding Owl back. Our mirror match is bad for the game. Again, I want to avoid this stuff. So chat, we're gonna skip hero bans, patches balancing. What heroes are broken right now? Skip that. New map mode changes. Again, I'm only going over specifically coaching stuff. How can we change tier 2? I think I'd chime in. I caught a little bit of this here, so we'll start here. So this will actually be a lot less long than I thought it'd be. Thank goodness.
Like we want to start from like creating a wider player base, which like I think we talked about like a ton of ideas, but like how do you guys feel like tier 2 is supported either? Because like this seems like a really hard problem to me, but like I'm not really sure either, but like seems like something related to like how can we make a better scene for our competitive players, right?
So I've mentioned this before, but I think what would 100% help tier 2 is if academy teams would be mandatory. I think that would be so great for the game, but obviously, Overwatch League teams don't also want to pay for an academy team, and this is why all these academy teams have fallen off, because there's just no point in having an academy team. They're trying a little bit now with like, two-way players can be on any contenders team, so I think they're trying, but I think that would be the ultimate yes please for me, have an academy team be mandatory. Yeah, but I don't think that's gonna.
No, I was gonna ask, like, what would be good about that? Like, for anyone watching who's like, well, why would it help to have mandatory academy teams?
Well, so in the past, academy teams give stability, right? Tier 2 right now, it's every contender season, there's 6 new teams, there's 1 or 2 teams that stay the same, but there's no like 6 players that stay together the whole time. What an academy team will do is contracts, which means that players have to keep playing together, if they and a salary and a better path, all right? Because now it's all or nothing. There's like 1 or 2 academy teams, but
right, it's all or nothing.
It's all or nothing, or maybe streaming, but it's all or nothing. And academy teams in the past, right? We had like 15 or 12. I don't know. We had a lot. They were basically the step between that and these academy teams would scrim with our teams way more than contenders teams do right now, just because they're intrinsically linked to each other. So that's the way I'd hope. But of course, money talks, and if investors don't want to also pay for a contenders teams, then that's understandable, but it's not great.
Hayes, how do you feel about that?
Yeah, I mean, I pretty much honestly agree. Like, tier 2 is kind of starving right now for some attention. Even contenders doesn't get a whole lot of views. They try and host the contenders channel, but still it's getting like 5,000 views. I think if you can find some way of, I mean, World Cup is actually a decent example of like supporting the tier 2 scene in a way, because you get to see a lot of these players that are generally not getting seen before. And that, I think World Cup is actually a huge support for tier 2, because you do see a lot of these players that are not known, and then you see them move up into Overwatch League.
Thanks for the raid, Raincoat Burb. I appreciate it. Okay, so I'm gonna skip this a little bit. I talked about this a little bit already. I think tier 2, like the tournament structure is really good right now. I think my one nitpick with tier 2 right now is like obviously the lack of stability really sucks, but obviously you can't force anybody to invest in it if the money's not gonna be there. But it is a very unstable. It is Raincoat Birthday's fault. It is very much, hey, you either are Overwatch League or you're nothing. There's no in between. That's it. The other thing to just think about with tier 2 as well is that the connection to OWL isn't really there. I think maybe next Overwatch League season, having like a small segment, once a day or once every other day or once a week, really just highlighting what's happening in contenders, like what teams are popping off, some highlight reel, just like 10 minutes, like that would be really cool. And like obviously spark interest, because people I don't think realize that the tier 2 level isn't really that far below Overwatch League, at least in terms of like the SR and the mechanical strength of the players. So like kind of connecting that one would be really, really good. You're a better Arista main bothead. Okay. All right. So I'm gonna skip this one as well. I'm going to get the coaching diff. And then we're going to wrap this up. So obviously a lot shorter than I intended, because I didn't realize so much of this was just general Overwatch discussion, which I wanted to avoid. But I also think it would be a little dry for us to go through so much of this.
I think Face has helped me a lot with scouting and like being a better scouter, because I think Face is like one of the best scouts in Overwatch League for sure.
I love that you bring that up as well, DP, because I actually feel like you are one of the coaches in Overwatch League that does the most set plays. Like thinking back to like the whole like a Reinhardt rotate with like
Yeah.
The great bamboozle. As they
a
say.
Yeah.
bunch of plays like that. So I
I
love
want to
that.
do both. I guess ideally we do both, right? Like we have great, like we have these like set plays that we think are gonna work. We like, you know, scout really hard, and like I think season 1 was the easiest time to do this, because the meta was really set. Season 2 was just goats 24/7, and I don't know how you guys felt. In season 2, I just felt like I was getting outskilled every fucking time by Titans and by Shock. It just felt like nothing I did like as a coach mattered. That sounds
That was
awful, but like,
definitely- it was definitely a coach diff. I think I don't know. I
you
feel
think
like
last season was a coach diff? I was just a bad
I feel
coach.
like Goats was definitely a coach diff. Like I feel like the coaches that had a really good understanding of Goats were the ones that dominated.
I kind of agree. Like Goats was just like, it just like which teams could actually like continue to improve and like have that synergy like with your, and it was literally just like bubble trades, planning, and like map control. Like that was it. Like it really was. Everyone talks about Goats like it was so incredibly complicated, and it was, but it was legitimately the same matchup again and again and again. So you just had to get the basics and then move on from there. Done. So I think if your team's not improving there and you feel like you're getting mechanically outskilled, I think you're dropping the ball as a coach, to be honest.
Yeah, I think Chalk had great coaches, or still have great coaches, but like that season, like they did a great job. I really agree too. Sorry.
Yeah. No, I feel like those kind of metas where it's more emphasis around teamwork, that's where you see the coaches really like the teams with good coaches that will really rise to the top and dominate.
Agreed.
What about Titans? Wasn't Titans like largely like I heard they were very player run. I think their coaches didn't do anything; they just weren't strategic. You know.
I think that team though, because they had such a long playtime being together, they were together for so long. They came into the league with like already really good synergy and trust in each other. And I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, but were they playing Goats in contenders as well before they came in? And they were
see that's where like synergy and like timing and coordination and like coaches can coach that. Though is the thing. Like if you're only coaching technique and strategy and stuff, but you're not like building a team and building synergy and building trust and like working on that in the big picture stuff, then yeah, you're going to struggle. So the teams like Vancouver come in there and just basically have AFK coaches and still do great because the value that a coach would provide is already there. Right? Like if you were to go into the Vancouver Titans at that season and they're already motivated, they're already working together, they're already synergistic, you wouldn't go in and start like lopping heads and changing structure. You would leave it as it was, and then all you would do is make sure, okay, is there any infights between the players? You solve that and then spark discussion. A lot of times when I was trialing for teams, or like coaching teams, especially recently once I figured this out because I'm kind of dense, I didn't even come in and be like, all right guys, this is how we're doing things. I would be like, what do you guys think is the way to do things? Okay, why aren't you doing it then? Like if you know what you're supposed to be doing, if you know what your mistakes are in this VOD, what's stopping you from doing it correctly? And then you actually get to the root issue, like, oh well, I didn't understand, or this guy never talks enough, or I couldn't, or like, well, you know, we call this but he always counter calls, like, and then you get to the real issues, right? You don't have to be like some big brain, but if you have players that already know, and like then that comes down to like just a synergy issue, and that's where Vancouver was just ahead of everybody. They didn't need the coaching as much. Like player-led teams work very well because if they're a player-led team that has an emphasis on like really strong individual players, really strong leadership, and players that trust each other, then you don't even need a coach. Like look at American Tornado. They don't have strong coaching. I have like one coach that joined midway through the season. Like there's no way that they have but they work together really well, right? Same thing at like Obey Alliance, right? And over in EU. You don't need a strong coach to do well. I think you need a strong coach to do really well because inevitably player issues and drama and meta changes, throw a cork in things, throw a wrench in it rather. So you need a coach to kind of solve and sort that stuff out better, but you don't have to have a coach. But you also have to be self-motivated, right?
As well.
They're playing more coaches at that time, but yeah.
So I think there's just incredible synergy and teamwork, and obviously these guys, they are the best players in the world, so they do have good game knowledge, probably similar game knowledge to coaches, obviously. And so yeah, they probably were coach run. But I think some of the teams like Shock, I feel like that was like obviously the players are all cracked, they're insane, but I think at the highest level it is the coaches that make a difference, to a certain degree.
I think chiming in on that too. I think one of the great challenges and one of the great jobs of a coach is having a great atmosphere within the team, because you have so many personalities that you need to mix and match and that need to work great together. And I think especially in Ghosts, they shine through because if you were all on the same page, you did great in game. But if your team was like not as synergized and didn't like each other and didn't like playing together, then that would be like even bigger in Ghosts. Like when you're playing Widow Hanzo meta, if you have a good way, you have a good Hanzo, you're gonna do good. But in Ghosts, that was definitely not the case. Where if your team wasn't on the same page, didn't like each other, didn't want to listen to each other, you weren't gonna do good. And I think that's two things that Shock and Titans had in common. They really like playing with each other, and the atmosphere was great.
I agree. Yeah.
for sure that meta, like you get that bubble like half a second earlier because you talk to your main tank about like when do you want it exactly, and then you guys like review it together because you're friends. You get that matrix like at the right time or whatever. You guys press W slightly like that point, whatever, 0.01 second faster, and then you're more together. Like it's huge. I totally agree with that though. That season 2, like even though Chalk had a great
and people need to realize that stuff obviously applied a lot to goats, but that applies to every meta. It doesn't matter if it's double sniper. Oh, we just needed snipers that popped off. Like bull crap. It's a load of horse manure. It's just more obvious when it's in like a goat situation that everybody's on the same page. But if your DPS are on the same page in any other meta, it's not going to work. Doesn't matter how good of a widow you have.
Also, like I kind of retract what I said before. Like I don't retract because I still think that they'd still be like top 3 with that roster. I guess.
Yeah, definitely.
But the coach diff, like that's why I think Krusty is so great, is because once you get like this skill bracket, right? Like your roster is this level of good, and you'll perform within this bracket. But then once you're in the top, like everyone's in that bracket, right? Like Titans, Chalk, were in that bracket. I think those were the only 2 teams that were legitimately.
Shut up, Backbone. You are the one person that there's no matter how good of a team synergy I have, you were such a sandbag that we could not have coached yourself out of bottom place anywhere we would have coached. It's only through my magnificent coaching leadership that we were able to cover up your errors.
In that skill bracket that season. So it was coach diff that year for sure. Yeah. And coach diff this year because I think.
Although I am just absolutely giddy that you made Hanzo look so good in that meta, and nobody even had the guts to try Hanzo or Mei for that matter. You're like the only one in either region that played Hanzo and Mei, and you made it look good.
The teams were like really good going into finals, like skill wise, but I think Shock was still the best.
I'm sorry. Every season the talent has gotten better. Like the talent has gotten better, the coaches have gotten better. Like the league is just improving each year, every season.
Backbone's a nut.
Next year is going to be a lot better than last year, and it's going to keep evolving, which is really fun to see.
Best Hanzo in the region. Best Mei in the region.
Like you see Justice, that team was like a free win before, and now it's like what the fuck? Like we have Mag, Fury, Decay on one team. Like,
arguably the best Tracer.
And they're not even like the scariest team in NA.
Actually, yeah, probably the best Tracer. Top 3 Echo. Top 5 Genji. I mean, Genji's not really fair because you didn't have my coaching behind your Genji, so obviously you kind of sucked at it.
It's still Shock. Like, but yeah, and then there's Dallas, like the second coming of Element Mystic. How scary is that? That's like, those teams you get to play in like NBA 2K or something like that, where you get to play like the all-time Chicago Bulls or something like that. You get to play the all-time.
Oh, you're talking about
Dallas or whatever.
Are you talking about Dallas Eternal?
Yeah, Dallas Eternal Mystic. Yeah, that's insane.
Do for the next season of OWL.
Okay, it's very okay. So like, I guess to wrap things up, I mean, not as much coaching discussion as I would have liked, but I think obviously coaches are a little bit hesitant to divulge secrets and like philosophies when it comes to stuff. I think the important thing is to kind of like, if we go down the list, was like, what does an Overwatch coach do in terms of like the leadership and strategy, and reinforcing that head coaches need to have good game knowledge, but also good interpersonal skills, the importance of learning Korean. Esports is a new frontier in terms of like the age of like why we don't see as many older coaches. It's unstable, not as much money. You feel the need to go be Overwatch yourself? No. Korean esports and like learning the language and how the better players are generally Korean, and just how like it's more an accepted job. So generally you have players that are more involved and steeped, I guess, in that culture. Social media influence, the danger of that, confidence, distractions, depression. How can we change tier 2? We talked about like, having a little segment with the Overwatch League, but also like there's not a lot of there's not a lot of attention on the scene. There's more than it used to be, and the structure is a lot better. The tournament structure, like the actual playing structure, is nice, but obviously some work to be done there. And then like the coach's role of like building synergy. It's not just about, hey, this person can click heads, these guys are just good and there's nothing they could do, but like building that synergy, building that trust so that you can make your team a team. Like you look at somebody like Backbone, and Backbone was basically almost always as good, maybe mechanically, as he is now. Maybe that's not true, but like he's always been the player that he's been, but he really showcased himself once he became a better teammate, right? And like that's how you make players look good, is like, they're better teammates, and that's something that Backbone got better at. And I think that goes for every player. Like, the main tank jumps in 1v6 and dies. You're like, what the heck? This guy's a moron. Why'd he do that? But I mean, no, everybody knows that. Like, even a Plat or a Diamond main tank knows that. But there's a communicational error, or somebody miscommunicated this, or he misunderstood. Like, that's the mistake, right? And that's not always necessarily to do with the main tank. So as a whole, a coach tries to see those errors and see those issues and tries to address those issues. Like, we have the knowledge. We know that we shouldn't be doing that, but it's still happening. Why? What can we do to fix that? And like, that's what a coach tries to do. And even not a coach, players, good players, these player-led teams have to solve those issues on their own.